So we're doing this podcast episode via Zoom because we're across the country from each other. He's not in my podcast studio, but one day I hope we'll meet in person. The gentleman I have here with me is Barry Adkins, and he wrote a story about a son that he lost. And the book is called Kevin's Last Walk. A father's. Wait, give me that second part again. It's a father's
A
final
father's
journey
final
with his son.
journey with his son.
That's it. Final journey. Father's final journey with his son. Kevin's. There it is. It's a long title, like you said before. Okay, so Barry, you've done something very unique. First of all, you've been through something pretty unique. We don't usually outlive our children. Do you want to first tell us about Kevin?
Kevin was like any other kid. He was really just somebody who I really never had any problems with him. He was all about the future farmers of America, raising pigs and riding mules and going hunting and going fishing and doing all that kind of stuff. Obviously, one thing I will tell you about him is he was not a very good student. He was a lot like his old man, right? High school was not his thing. That's for sure.
And what's his story? Most people here will hopefully pick up the book, but right now they don't know anything about him. Tell us what happened, what age.
So I'll kind of tell this part of it. So Kevin had just graduated from high school. I remember going to his high school graduation ceremony, and he gave me a hug after that and whispered, "Thanks for not giving up on me, Dad." And he wanted to buy a truck. He got a job making good money. Wanted to buy a truck. I had to co-sign a loan. I made him give me 3 months worth of insurance payments and car payments before I was going to co-sign that loan, right? Because I'm not going to be on the hook for it. You are. And I was hoping he'd find one from a private party. I'd go down to the credit union, sign papers, and be out there in 5 minutes. He found one at a dealership, and I'm not really a big fan of that whole process. So I got to go down there and sign papers. And I sit down in the financial guy's office, and the first thing he says to me is, "How about some life insurance?" I'm like, "Look, dude, I'm not here for life insurance. I don't need any life insurance. My wife will do just fine if something happens to me." And he said, "I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about your son." And I'm that guy. I'm that guy who rather indignantly told him that 18-year-old boys don't need life insurance because they don't die. But I was wrong. They do die. He wouldn't live long enough to make a single payment on that truck. So a few weeks after that, he decided he wanted to move out. I remember him coming into our living room and sitting in this brown chair that sits in front of a big picture window. I sat down in that brown chair and started talking about how his life was finally beginning and he wanted to move out. I did my best to discourage him because we really never had any problems with him, right? His high school principal didn't even know who he was. But I didn't have any luck talking him out of it. So a couple of weeks later, his buddy Craig came over and they started the process of moving him out. And he's 18 years old. They threw a bed, a TV, and a dresser in the back of his truck. And he came back in and he came into the living room and he told me something I've never forgotten. He said he wasn't going to take his toothbrush with him. He'd be back tomorrow morning and grab it. I walked out front with him like I normally do, gave him a hug, told him that I loved him and to be careful, watched him drive away. It was the last time I saw him alive.
What happened?
That night, his friends decided to throw a little housewarming party for him. Started with a keg of beer, moved on to shots. He left a voicemail for his sister that night talking about how drunk he was, how he just did 6 or 7 shots in a row. Didn't sound like a big deal. He passed out a short time after he left that voicemail, but the people at the party just laid him in his bed on his side in case he vomited. They actually went in and shaved his head and his legs while he was passed out because he's just passed out, right? His buddy Craig was worried about him. And around 4 a.m., calls started coming in to 911. First calls were difficulty breathing. Next calls were not breathing. My son died alone in a hospital while I slept peacefully in my bed. The next morning, Sunday morning, sitting around drinking coffee, right? My wife and I are talking about what day, 8:30 in the morning, the doorbell rings. And we're looking at each other because we're not expecting company. I open the door and I see two police officers and somebody in plain clothes at my front door. That should have been a big red flag, right? But I'm that guy. It didn't even occur to me that something bad had happened. One of the officers and the person in plain clothes stayed by the front door. The other officer walked in and stood in front of that brown chair that Kevin had sat in 2 weeks before and talked about how his life was finally beginning. He said there'd been an accident. Your son is dead. We asked who, because we have a number of children. They said it was Kevin, and they handed me his driver's license. I got to tell you, Joel, it's something pretty final when a police officer hands you your child's driver's license, because until that moment in time, you're holding out hope that this is all a big mistake. You've misspelled the last name. You need to be 3 streets over or next door, any place but my place. But when they hand you your child's driver's license, you know he's gone and he's never coming back.
What happens after that? What's that day like? What's the next day like? I guess eventually something changes in the day to day, but what happens for those first couple days?
You know, it's one of those things where you're amazed that people are still driving down the road. The world is still turning.
Why didn't the world stop?
The world for you stops, and you're looking around going, wow, there's people still driving down the road. Don't they know my son just died? And you have to tell that story. You have to tell people about it. And it's a mind-numbing experience. You just, there's no way. People always say, I can't imagine. And I would say that is correct, because it's just, like I said, you just don't understand why the world's even turning still. And to be clear, I was angry with God, right? Why would he let something like this happen? What did I ever do to deserve this, right? Back up time, take me, let him live. I made it clear to him. I had a lot of conversations with him in the backyard. I was pretty pissed about it. But a couple of days later, I was laying in bed. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning. And this is a little hard for me to describe, Joel. But I was laying in bed and I just had this feeling like somebody just walked in the room. You know how somebody walks in behind you and you go, did someone just walk in? I had that feeling. And then there was this light, a light I'd never seen before and haven't seen since. And there was a message. And the message was, Kevin didn't suffer, and something very good would come from this. And then it was gone. I didn't get to ask what it is, right? And it didn't make everything okay. It took me a long time to process that. Grief is a long process, but it did give me a mission to try to figure out what something very good is.
When did you start to figure out what that thing you could be doing to bring some good out of all this?
That took a while as well, because I didn't know if, is it something little? I actually talked about it at the memorial. Something very good will come from this, right? I don't know what it is, but something will. I wrote letters to the editor, they did, it was on the news, and I thought, well, maybe this is it. But then it just kept evolving, right? And we got to the point where we had to go pick up his ashes, right? And I remember doing that. And I walk into the funeral home and, they've got pictures on the wall and music in the background. They take me into an office, sit me down in a big, comfortable chair, a big desk in front of me. And a funeral director walks in and sets an urn down in front of me. An urn that holds all the remains of the kid that I burped, changed his diapers, coached all of his sports, taught him to shoot a gun, swing a golf club, all of that stuff. All the remains of him were sitting in an urn in front of me. And there's one thing I knew at that point, and that was I didn't want to be a victim. Because the world doesn't need any more victims. We've got plenty already. The world needs people who take something bad and they make something very good come from it. And my thought process is, what would I want somebody else to do if it happened to their kid? And for me, the answer was pretty easy. It was just to get out and tell the story, not for the money, because there is no money in the world to fix the hurt, Joel. It doesn't exist. The only thing that helps is to try to make something good come from such a senseless tragedy.
And since then, you've been telling that story to schools and churches across the country. What do you hope, or hopefully this is what's happening? What is the audience getting out of this?
So a little bit of the backdrop. So then we decided to walk. I decided he always talked about wanting to move to Montana someday and buy a ranch.
From?
So from Gilbert, Arizona. We live in Gilbert, Arizona. He wanted to go to Kalispell, Montana, which is where I grew up, and buy a ranch. So we decided we'd take his ashes there. In my mind, I decided that I wasn't going to drive them there. I was going to put them in my backpack and walk there and tell the story.
What's that distance?
It's about 1,400 miles. Yeah, it's a pretty good putt. And you can imagine there's people tried to talk me out of it. Was I terrified? Yeah. Was my wife terrified? Yeah. I'm not independently wealthy. It was a process. So what I do now is I tell the story and I talk about, trying to make something good come from something bad. Right. And the one thing the reaction is the rooms are just utterly silent. Because the thing I tell the students up front, and this is important, is I tell them, look, I'm not here to tell you how you live your life. I'm just here to tell you a story, man. And as you listen to this story, I want you to think about what you want your story to be. And that's how I started, Joel.
I'm sure there are young people in the audience who, thanks to your story and your son's story, have probably made better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And decision making is one of the key takeaways, right? The two most important decisions you're ever going to make, apart from following Jesus, are about drugs and alcohol. We know stories. Everybody knows stories. I tell everybody, you need to educate yourselves about the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse as if your life depends upon it.
Do you know the numbers on this? Like, how common is it? How many kids each year lose their life? Do you know these things?
I do not know those exact numbers, but I will tell you this. The one number I did look up was the rehab industry. Somewhere between 35 and $40 billion a year is spent trying to get people off of drugs and alcohol. That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. So we've heard your little bit here of what you've gone through, what you did because of it. Oh, well, first of all, because what I want to get into is asking about your wife and how she's handled this. But before we do that, you made the walk?
Yeah.
How long did that take?
It took about 4 months. I averaged about 90 miles a week. I met a lot of wonderful people out there. Every day, people would stop and ask me if I needed a ride. If it was raining, about every car that went by. But my wife met me about every 3 or 4 miles. So they would stop, and the truck had Kevin's Last Walk on it. So people would stop and talk every day. I tell everybody, if I can pull off something like that, imagine what you can do, right? I'm not all that. I'm an old hillbilly, Joel.
Yeah. And that in itself, people stopping and you being able to tell them about what happened, that had to be therapeutic for you.
Oh, the whole thing was very therapeutic. Probably my favorite memory was I spoke in Flagstaff, which is about, well, Phoenix is at 1,300 feet, Flagstaff's at 7,400 feet. I spoke at a high school there. And a few days later, I don't know how far out of Flagstaff I was, I saw a car go by and the brake lights went on. I thought, oh, cool, I'll stop and talk to this guy for a little bit. And he got out and we chatted and he said, hey, are you the guy that spoke at Flagstaff High School a few days ago? And I said, I probably am. And he gave me a hug and thanked me because for the first time, his son came home and told him about what happened at school.
Did that son come home and tell him about it in a way that, he's going to make some different decisions or he's going to be more careful?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think
Yeah,
it sounds
it
to
opened up
me,
the conversation.
yeah, it sounds to me like it opens up these conversations so that kids can be aware. One thing that helped me, we have four kids, my wife and I, and when we went to my oldest, who's now a soldier, he did the Outward Bound when he was about 13 years old, and he did
Oh, okay.
3 weeks of like canoeing and hiking and camping and all this tough work for 3 weeks out in the Florida heat in the summer with no bug spray. I mean, just a rough camp that he went through. And after, when we went to pick him up, they gave us a talk. It was like a full day. And they said that boys, until they're 25 years old, don't have the proper synaptic connections in their brain to make good choices. It's why car insurance is higher. A lot of the big name rental companies won't rent them cars because when we're young, we're dumb and we make really stupid decisions. But I think if we're aware of that at a young age, right, and be told, hey, it almost isn't your fault. There almost isn't free will for some decisions at that age because the brain just isn't connected. At
Right.
least knowing that as a young man would have helped me to make some better decisions. Like, oh yeah, I'm kind of dumb right now for certain things. So I think you kind of bring that message to them that, whether do you talk about the peer pressure part of it? Is that part of what happened?
That is something I typically talk about afterwards. And one of the things, this isn't 100% true, but for me, you think about peer pressure and you think these people around you in high school matter. But for me, I only have one friend I talk to from high school. I don't know how many you have, but my daughter say, "Well, I have a lot of friends." Well, how many of them? Not Facebook friends. How many friends do you have? Oh, two, three that you talk to all the time. So all of this peer pressure, the things that you think you need to do to fit in, these people are going to be gone after high school, and you're never going to see them again. You might see them on Facebook and social media today, but they're not going to be your friends. They're not going to be the one you go have lunch or dinner with or whatever.
That's absolutely true. I've said that same thing to my kids, and I'm the same. I'm 3,000 miles away from where I graduated high school, and I don't see any of those people other than on Facebook once every few months. I'll see something.
I
You're
have one
absolutely
or
right.
two. I really only have one friend. I see him every time I go to Montana. I talk to him a few times a year. I have one friend, one or two friends from college, but again, same thing. I, there's peer pressure there, but you have to remember, and peer pressure will always be there, Joel. There's pressure when there's parties and stuff. I'm still around guys in their 50s that don't know that have problems with alcohol, right?
Mhm.
And it's always going to be there. Come on, have another drink. That's always going to be there. So you
And
have
there could even be this artificial outside pressure that is really all in our head of keeping up with the Joneses. You see that quite a bit. Nobody's telling you to go buy that bigger boat, but the neighbor got a bigger boat. And somehow we think we're not a good human being or something. Or who does he think he is being better than me? I see this all the time. And I can't believe full grown adults have that peer pressure in their head.
you know, and that's something with age. Um, I don't really care about that anymore. There was a time I will agree. You're like, oh man, that's a really nice. I wish I had a house like that, or I had a, RV, or I had this or that. But those things don't make you happy, Joel. And I just
Maybe
had
for
this
3 months.
conversation.
Maybe for 3 months, you'll be happy.
Yeah. But I had that conversation with somebody about happiness. And I said, there is no happiness out there. Happiness is in here. That's where happiness happens. You will never, ever, ever find it out there.
Yeah.
It just doesn't
Well,
exist.
I want to talk about your wife and how she
Yeah.
handled this whole process? Because she doesn't have the exact same experience that you do, because you went on this walk. And even though she supported you, you're out there doing the walk, you're out there giving the talks. So you've gotten that built-in therapy through this process. What about your wife? How has she handled and come out of this?
So that's an important thing to discuss, right? Because a lot of times when a child passes away, it destroys marriages. And one of the things that we agreed on very early, not only with my wife, but with my children, is we're not going to play the blame game. Is there blame to go around? Yeah, but it ain't going to fix anything. It's not going to fix anything. And I will say that I will sign my wife's application for sainthood anytime, because uh, um, she was very supportive of everything. Was she scared? Yeah, we both were. We cried for quite a while when I
How
told her
many
what I wanted to do,
how many
because she
kids do you have?
we have 5 surviving kids. We have grandkids around here. Kind of cool story. You mentioned one of your kids is a soldier. My one grandson, Colin, is in the Marines over in Australia right now. And he wanted to get a tattoo. And my daughter said, well, you need to get something that means something if you're going to get a tattoo. Well, one of the things that I say every time I tell the story is the way you respond to adversity is going to define your life. And it will. And suffice to say, my wife finally managed to get me to write it out in my handwriting, and he has that tattooed on his arm.
What's it say?
It says, the way you respond to adversity will define your life. And it has a little picture of me below that. Something I can't
Uh,
remember.
well, that's a pretty appropriate thing to have on the arm of a Marine,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're going to feel adversity a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He has, I warned him, I said, they're going to bust you down, man. They're going to bust you down. And he admitted, we just talked to him a couple of days ago, and he's like, yeah, they have.
Yeah.
But it's, as you know, uh, I actually think the military is really good for them, because I don't know about your kids, but my grandson, especially my grandkids, a lot of times they don't look at you directly when they're talking to you when they're in high school, and they kind of mumble a little bit and that kind of stuff. The Marines cured all of that, right? You're going to look right at them and you're going to enunciate. And
Yeah.
so, from that perspective, I'm sure you saw that with your son too.
Well, I got an early thing to that. From eighth, ninth, and 10th grade, we sent them away to Georgia from Florida, north of Atlanta, and we're way down near Miami. And we sent them away to military school for 3 years, and
Oh,
instant change. I mean, he wasn't horrible, not at all, but he wasn't focused. And something happened amazing is, he'd be wearing his hat and we'd walk in anywhere. And right before he came in the door, he'd take it off, whether he was
yep.
in uniform or not. He just became this man at 14 years old. In fact, at 16, he came home. It was COVID, so we stopped the military school and brought him home, and he finished high school here. And he had an interview at a local grocery store. And this was, I wish I would have had a picture, because I dropped him off for the interview, but I shopped at the grocery store while he was having the interview. And every time I came down the aisle, I would see him in the front by customer service being interviewed by the manager, and it was embarrassing. My son looked like he was the one giving the interview, and the interviewer, the manager of that department, had his head down, pants were slouched, shirt was wrinkled. He looked horrible. And my son at 16 was standing straight up, and I could hear him say, yes, sir, absolutely. I'd love to, just speaking really well. So, yes, you're absolutely right. Military does that for kids,
It's,
whether it's the
I think
Marines
it's
or a
good.
military school for kids.
Yeah. No, I think it's really good for them.
So, you have five surviving children. You had six kids at one point.
Well, we had a total of 7. We did have one other son that passed away too. So yeah, we understand that process. And like I said, we just made sure we didn't play the blame game. Right? Was there people at the party that should have done something differently? Yeah, there was a 28-year-old that had the house. Um, but I never focused on changing any laws or going after anybody. I just wanted to tell the story.
Yeah.
Uh,
How have your children dealt with this? And what year did this happen?
It happened in 2005. It actually just passed the 20-year mark. Um, and we still talk about Kevin all the time, right? Because that's one of the part of the grief process that sometimes people don't want to talk about someone that passed away. And for me, yeah, I like talking about all the stupid stuff he did, right? All his quirks and that kind of stuff. And so um, and none of the grandkids, one of the granddaughters does remember him, right? She would not, she was staying with us at the time, and she would not go to bed until he came home and tucked her in. I'm like, I'm calling him, you need to get home because she ain't going to bed until you get home. So get home.
Awesome. What did you do for a living back then that you were able to go away and do a 1,400-mile walk for 4 months?
So I had just started a company, and I'll plug them. The name of the company is Rhodey and Schwarz. They make test equipment that tests uh, the devices we're talking on right now. Anything that goes over there, anything wireless, we're involved in, and they're privately held, so they can do things a little differently. So they actually did a vacation drive, and they tried to talk me out of this, by the way, too, because I had just started there, and it's a process. And they actually did a vacation drive, and people donated vacation time to keep me on the payroll for 4 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long did you work there, or are you still with the company?
I'm still with the company. I started there about a month before Kevin passed away. And it's been 20 years. I'm still there. And it's one of those jobs, Joel, that I don't dread. I'm an application engineer is what I am. So I go in and show people how to do stuff. How do you make this measurement? How do you do this kind of measurement science stuff, which is interesting for me. And I kind of like doing it.
And what is your relationship with God, and how has that journey been throughout this?
I knew who he was before, right? I actually grew up Roman Catholic, but we had started going to a non-denominational Bible church, which started the process. Kevin was the one who started going there with one of my neighbors. And we decided to give it a try, and it's been a good thing. But before this happened, I knew who he was. I knew who God was. I knew who Jesus was, but hadn't really let them in here into my heart. And what happened with that light changed everything for me. It went from the theoretical to, wow, he's real. And you'll hear people talk about stuff, but when it happened, I can't believe it happened to me, Joel. And to paraphrase it, um, the God chooses the unimpressive to do his work, right? Or something like that. And I qualify, right? Why would he pick me for this? So my interest level in this kind of stuff was non-existent. I,
Hmm.
you know,
How come God, what do you think? How come God doesn't give more of us messages? And obviously, you went through a more extreme thing than maybe
right.
99% of the population, but why aren't we getting those messages? The Bible tells a lot of stories about people getting messages. We don't get those like you got.
I think part of it is because we don't have the quiet time, right? You don't have that. In biblical times, there's a lot of quiet time, and we don't get that. And that brings up another story. I was out in the middle of the Bob Marshall Wilderness up in Montana with my uncle one time. We were sitting on top of a ridge someplace, just enjoying it. And I turned to him, my uncle, and I said, "Man, it's quiet up here." And he said, "Yeah, and it's got a lot to say."
Hmm.
Right? Because you have to It's not a booming voice. It's a still small voice. Is probably a better way to describe it. And you have to have quiet time. I think you ask, I'm going to tell you, I think quiet time is missing from the world today.
Yeah. There's a lot of noise, and I think phones have, I was thinking about it this morning actually. I thought about when the internet started and I was a young man and I was in my early 20s, and I would go to the computer and waste a couple of hours chatting with people, America Online. But then I'd go play basketball with my friends and spend a few hours, and I didn't think about the internet. I didn't have access to it. But today, you don't let that go. That tether, it's tied to you. It's your
It
phone.
is.
So that it's when we go away from a phone or technology, a screen, we get a little bored. I don't remember that boredom before.
You have to find a way. So when I did the walk, I did not listen to music. I did not have any electronics with me because, and walking is probably the easiest way to do it. Just go out and walk and let your mind go where it needs to go, right? And don't have that phone. Don't be looking at the phone all the time. Because you need that quiet time, and that's hard to get.
How many hours a day was that? You said 90 miles a week?
Yeah, so I started out walking 5 days a week and getting the 90 miles in, but the days off weren't really working. So I ended up walking about 13 miles a day. So whatever that was, 7 or 8 hours. But it took me a little while to figure out it's not a race. I don't need to go real fast. So probably 7 or 8 hours. And probably one of the other common questions I get is, did I ever think about quitting? The answer to that is no. But I wasn't even to Flagstaff, and I started wondering what I got myself into because I had ingrown toenails, blisters, plantar fasciitis, sore knee, all of the above. And I started wondering what I'd got myself into. But I realized that I wasn't thinking about it right because I was thinking about the 1,200 miles I still have to go to get to Montana. And so I blocked that out and started thinking, I'm going to walk 3 miles, 4 miles. I'm going to take a break. And then I'll worry about the next 3 or 4 miles. And it's a great metaphor for life, right? It's a great metaphor for life because you start thinking about that 1,200 or 1,300 miles, it gets inside your head in a hurry. Uh, but I just had to block it out. And the next thing you know, you're in Montana.
Fantastic metaphor for life. My story is I built some businesses and I came from nothing, got here on a boat from Cuba when I was a kid, and I didn't build a multi-million dollar business overnight. I made a couple of dollars at a garage sale. I made a couple of dollars at a flea market. I
Yeah.
discovered eBay.com, and it was tiny steps at a time, not even knowing what the final step was. It was just like, how do I make a couple dollars today so I can get out of this ghetto?
Yeah.
And you take one little step. So absolutely. I like this cartoon that I've seen on social media, and it's a guy in front of a ladder, and the steps, each hand, each step is really far from each other. So it's really big steps. You can't do it because you can't even reach the second. But the other guy has a ladder full of little steps, right? And
Yeah.
he could just keep climbing with those little steps. So yeah, you did literally one step at a time, a few
Yeah.
miles at a time. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. If And I want to help you get this story out there and introduce you hopefully to some schools. How can we do that? How can how can somebody contact you to hire you to
So
speak?
the website is kevinslastwalk.com. And then on Facebook, it's Kevin's Last Walk, all one word. And again, I don't do this for the money. So if I have to travel, it's travel costs. There's not a big speaker fee with that. And I just want to tell the story. If they reach out, I think we talked about this before we got on the air, but I have a school district that's made this part of the curriculum. COVID forced me to do a video, right? During COVID, I couldn't go anywhere, so we did a video. So I would prefer to tell it in person. I think students respond. Teachers have done it both ways, and they're like, "Yeah, these kids don't respond the same way as they do when you're here.
Yeah.
So I've got lots of references. I've got feedback. These kids are actually listening. One of my favorite lines that one of the kids, there was a few hundred comments in there, but I tried to summarize it. But if I was to say that my favorite one, there was one kid that said, "There's no way God wasn't involved in this." And I
That's
did
awesome.
public school, right? So I don't talk about him, but kids listen.
So it's kevinslastwalk.com and then on Facebook also, one word, Kevin's Last Walk.
Yeah, bring me in, man.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll
yeah,
come to Florida and see you, and we'll do one in person.
we'd love to. We'd love to. I'm going to work on that, I promise.
Yeah.
Larry, thank you for being here and for sharing your story and for the things that you do. If your son is looking down on us, he's probably proud of the work that you're doing and the word that you're spreading. Thank you and keep it up.
Thanks, Joel.